If small things still get under your skin, it's not because you lack discipline, it's because you were taught Stoicism wrong. Real Stoicism doesn't suppress emotion, it removes the trigger entirely. And once you understand this rule, nothing hooks into you the same way again. Something important needs to happen before we go any further. Up to now, you've probably been listening and nodding, thinking, yes, I know this. I know I shouldn't react so much. But knowing is not the same as seeing. And Stoicism was never about giving yourself better advice. It was about changing how your mind sees reality in the first place. If you miss that shift, everything else becomes a struggle. So before we talk about control, discipline, or calm, we need to correct one quiet mistake almost everyone makes without realizing it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose control because they feel too much. They lose control because they label too fast. The moment something happens, the mind rushes to name it. Harmful, disrespectful, dangerous, urgent. Once that label sticks, the body reacts automatically. Heart rate rises, muscles tighten, thoughts race. And by the time you notice what's happening, the reaction already owns you. This is where most people go wrong. They try to fight the reaction itself. They tell themselves to calm down, to breathe, to be patient, to be stoic. But by then, it's already too late. That's like trying to stop a fire after pouring gasoline on it. The Stoics saw this clearly, and that's why they never focused on suppressing emotion. They focused on something much earlier and much quieter, how the event was classified in the mind. The Stoics believed that nothing enters your emotional life raw. Every event passes through a filter first. That filter asks a simple question. What is this? And whatever answer you give determines everything that follows. If your mind says, this is an attack, anger appears. If it says, this is a threat, fear appears. If it says, this is unfair, resentment appears. The emotion is not the problem. The classification is. This is why two people can experience the same event and react completely differently. One person hears criticism and feels insulted. Another hears the same words and feels curious. One sees a delay as disrespect. Another sees it as neutral. The difference is not emotional strength, it's mental labeling. And most of the time, this labeling happens so fast you don't even notice it. Modern psychology calls this appraisal. The Stoics called it judgment. Either way, the insight is the same. Emotions follow meaning, not events. Yet almost everyone is trained to believe the opposite. You're told that feelings just happen, that reactions are automatic, that some things naturally make you angry. The Stoics would say that's a convenient myth, not because you're weak, but because you were never taught how your mind actually works. Think about how often the word should sneaks into your thoughts. They shouldn't talk to me like that. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't have to deal with this. The moment that thought appears, the event is no longer neutral. It has been labeled as a violation. And once something is a violation, reaction feels justified, necessary even. You're no longer responding to reality. You're responding to a story about reality. The Stoics trained themselves to interrupt this exact moment, not with positive thinking, not with denial, but with precision. They would ask, sometimes silently, sometimes consciously, what exactly is this, stripped of my opinion? Not, how do I feel about it? Not, what does it mean about me? Just facts. Words were spoken. A message arrived late. A plan changed. That's it. No insult, no threat, no urgency, just events. This sounds simple, but it's deeply uncomfortable at first, because it removes the emotional fuel you're used to running on. Many people secretly believe that their reactions protect them, that anger defends boundaries, that anxiety keeps them safe, that urgency makes them effective. The Stoics discovered the opposite. Most reactions don't protect you, they drain you, and they do it quietly, over and over, every day. Once you start reclassifying impressions, something strange happens. You notice that many things you thought were problems are just noise. Not good, not bad, just things happening. When the mind stops calling everything a threat, the body stops acting like it's under attack. Calm is no longer something you force. It's something that appears naturally when there's nothing to fight. This is why Stoicism doesn't ask you to tolerate disrespect or ignore reality. It asks you to be accurate. Is this truly harmful or merely uncomfortable? Is this truly urgent or just emotionally loud? Is this truly about you or just about someone else's behavior? Accuracy removes drama, and drama is what feeds reactivity. Here's the life-changing shift most people miss. When you stop labeling events as emotional emergencies, you don't become passive. You become clear. You still act. You still set boundaries. You still make decisions, but you do it without the inner chaos. Action comes from reason, not reflex. That's real strength. The Stoics knew that trying to manage emotions is exhausting because it treats the symptom, not the cause. Reclassifying impressions treats the cause directly. When the cause is gone, the symptom never appears. That's why advanced Stoicism feels effortless from the outside. Not because life is easy, but because the mind is no longer mislabeling everything as a crisis. At first, this practice feels slow. You'll catch yourself after reacting and think, I labeled that wrong. That's fine. That's training. Over time, the gap moves earlier. You start noticing the label as it forms, and eventually, many labels simply don't arise at all. The event comes and goes without sticking, without dragging your mood with it, without hijacking your day. This is the moment when people say, nothing bothers you anymore. That's not true. Things still register, but they don't invade. They don't take over your inner space without permission. You're no longer cleaning up emotional messes all day. You're preventing them. And this is only the beginning, because once you understand that reactivity is a categorization mistake, a deeper question appears. If your mind has the power to label events one way, could it learn to pause before labeling at all? Could there be a space where nothing is decided yet? That question leads directly to the next lesson, and that's where real freedom starts. That question at the end isn't philosophical decoration. It's the next door. Because once you realize your mind is slapping labels onto life at lightning speed, a new frustration appears. Even when you know the label is wrong, the reaction still starts to rise. You catch it, but it's already moving. Your chest tightens, your jaw locks, your thoughts get loud, and then comes the guilty thought. Why can't I just stay calm? That guilt is a trap, and it's exactly where modern advice fails you. A lot of people secretly feel broken because they can't force calm on command. They watch others look composed and assume they're missing some rare gift. But the Stoics didn't chase calm like it was a trophy. They trained something far more realistic and far more powerful. Delay. A small slice of time that you control even when your emotions are loud, even when your body is buzzing, even when calm is not available. Here's the short truth that hits hard. If calm is your goal, you will panic the moment you don't have it. You will treat every strong emotion as a failure. You will start fighting yourself, and that fight adds fuel. The Stoics avoided this by choosing a goal that works under pressure. They didn't ask, "How do I feel peaceful?" They asked, "Can I pause before I agree with this impression?" That's what delay is. It's not being slow. It's not being passive. It's creating distance between the first spark and the decision to feed it. The Stoics called that decision assent. An impression shows up, a look, a word, a setback. Then your mind wants to say, "Yes, this is bad. Yes, this is personal. Yes, this is urgent." That yes is where you lose freedom. Delay is the ability to postpone that yes by just a moment. And that moment is enough to change everything. Most people think reactions are like lightning, instant and unstoppable. But look closer. There is always a sequence. First, the impression arrives, then a flash of interpretation, then emotion builds, then behavior follows. The Stoics trained themselves to interrupt the chain at the smallest possible point, not by crushing emotion, but by slowing agreement. They treated the mind like a gatekeeper. This impression wants entry. It can wait. Delay sounds small, but it's the difference between being dragged and being led. When you delay, you don't need to be calm to be wise. You can be shaking inside and still choose your next move. That's why this skill is so brutal and so freeing. It removes excuses. It shows you that power is not the absence of emotion. Power is the presence of choice. This is also why the Stoics were obsessed with practice. They understood that delay is not a clever idea. It's a trained reflex. Under stress, you don't rise to your philosophy. You drop to your habits. So they built habits that created space. One of the simplest methods is to speak to the impression like it's a pushy salesperson at your door. Not with anger, with control. "Hold on, you're just an impression." This is not magical self-talk. It's a reminder of what is happening in your mind. The event is outside. The impression is inside. The impression is a suggestion, not a command. Your brain treats thoughts like facts when you don't challenge them. Delay is the challenge. Another method is to shift your body on purpose, not to calm down, but to interrupt autopilot. Relax your tongue, drop your shoulders, unclench your hands. These actions are not about pretending you're okay. They're about breaking the chain that turns emotion into immediate behavior. The Stoics understood that the mind and body are connected. If your body is already preparing for battle, your mind will look for reasons to fight. Small physical shifts create enough room for delay to exist. There's also a deeper reason delay works. Time changes meaning. A comment that feels unbearable in the first 2 seconds often feels smaller after 20. Not because the event changed, but because the mind stopped treating it as a fire alarm. Emotional intensity tries to convince you that action must be immediate. Delay proves that urgency is often a trick. This is why reactive people feel trapped. The emotion screams, "Do something now." Send the message. Raise your voice. Defend your ego. Cut them off. Prove your point. The Stoic response is not, "Be calm." The Stoic response is, "Not yet." 2 words that can save relationships, careers, and self-respect. And you need to know this. Delay is not weakness. People confuse pausing with losing. In reality, the person who can pause has the advantage. A reactive person is predictable. Push the button, get the reaction. That makes you easy to manipulate. A person who delays becomes difficult to control because they do not deliver instant emotional rewards to other people's behavior. Insults stop working. Pressure stops working. Provocation stops working. Not because you're numb, but because you're not available for impulsive games. Delay also protects your identity. When you react fast, you become the kind of person your worst moment describes. That's painful. People regret the words they said when they were just upset. They regret the decisions they made when they were under pressure. Delay prevents you from handing your character over to the mood of the moment. Now, here's the hard part. The pause will feel like death at first. It will feel like swallowing fire, because your mind believes reacting is how you stay safe. It believes responding instantly is how you keep dignity. So when you delay, your ego will protest. It will say, if you don't respond right now, you'll look weak. That's a lie. You're not weak for being slow. You're strong for not being owned. A useful way to train delay is to build a personal rule. No response while the body is hot. Hot means you feel speed inside you, racing thoughts, tight chest, a need to win. In that state, even smart people say dumb things. So you decide ahead of time. When I'm hot, I wait. That rule turns delay into a system, not a hope. You can also train delay with low-stakes moments. Waiting 5 seconds before replying to a small annoyance. Taking one breath before answering a difficult question. Letting a message sit for 10 minutes instead of firing back. Every time you do this, you strengthen the part of you that is capable of choice under pressure. This is not about manners. It's mental strength training. Calmness may come later. Sometimes it won't. Some days your nervous system will be overloaded. Some moments will hit old wounds. The Stoics prepared for that reality. That's why they didn't build their life on staying calm. They built it on staying free. And once you get even a little good at delay, something surprising happens. You start seeing the next layer. You realize the problem isn't only speed. It's that your mind often accepts meaning before you even notice it's doing it. Delay gives you the chance to catch that hidden meaning forming in real time, before it becomes anger, fear, or shame. That's where the real work begins next. That last realization changes the game, because once you learn to delay, you start noticing something even more unsettling. During that pause, your mind is already busy filling in gaps. It whispers explanations, motives, intentions. It tells you why this happened and what it means about you, about them, about the future. And the uncomfortable truth is this. Most of what it tells you has never been verified, yet it still controls how you feel. Here's the part most people never question. They assume the meaning their mind creates is accurate. They treat it like a fact. And then they wonder why certain words, looks, or silences still hit so hard. The Stoics saw this as one of the most dangerous habits of the human mind, reacting to meaning that has not been tested. A short message feels cold, so the mind says, "They're upset with me." Someone interrupts you, and the mind says, "They don't respect me." A plan changes, and the mind says, "I don't matter." None of these statements came from reality. They came from interpretation. But once the interpretation is accepted, the emotion follows automatically. Hurt, anger, anxiety, resentment. Not because of what happened, but because of what you decided it meant. The Stoics were ruthless about this. They refused to react to anything until its meaning survived inspection. Not emotional inspection, rational inspection. They treated first impressions the way a careful judge treats rumors. Interesting, maybe, but not actionable yet. This is hard, because the brain hates uncertainty. When something happens, it wants closure immediately. Silence feels threatening. Ambiguity feels unsafe. So the mind rushes to fill the gap with a story. Any story feels better than not knowing. The problem is that the story is usually biased toward fear, ego, or past wounds. The mind doesn't ask, "Is this true?" It asks, "What explanation protects me or confirms what I already believe?" That's why emotional triggers feel personal. They are built on meaning that flatters or threatens the ego. This was done to me. This says something about my worth. This confirms my fear. The Stoics trained themselves to catch this move in real time. They would ask a quiet but powerful question. What proof do I have for this meaning? Not later, not after the reaction, right there. Most meanings fail instantly under that question. Take disrespect. One of the most common triggers. Someone speaks bluntly, interrupts, disagrees. The mind labels it as disrespect. But is it proven? Could it be distraction, stress, different communication style, ignorance rather than intent? The Stoics didn't deny the discomfort. They denied the authority of unverified conclusions. And once disrespect is no longer certain, anger loses its foundation. Or take urgency. A message marked urgent. A deadline moved up. A request made with pressure. The body reacts like danger is present. But urgency is often a social label, not a fact. The Stoics would separate real danger from emotional noise. Is anyone harmed if this waits? Is something irreversible happening right now? If not, the urgency is assumed, not real. Anxiety fades when the illusion of emergency collapses. This rule alone can dismantle most daily stress, because stress is not caused by events. It's caused by stories about consequences that haven't happened yet. The Stoics knew that the future exists only as imagination until it arrives. Reacting to imagined outcomes is like fighting shadows, exhausting and pointless. There's another layer to this that cuts deep. Many people don't just assume meaning, they assume hostile meaning by default. They expect rejection, disrespect, or betrayal, not because it's happening now, but because it happened before. Old experiences quietly shape new interpretations. The present gets judged through the lens of the past. The Stoics warned against this without using modern language. They knew the mind loves shortcuts, even when they're unfair. This is why two people can hear the same words and only one feels wounded. The words didn't change. The meaning assigned to them did. And that meaning was shaped by memory, not reality. Once you see this, something shifts. You realize many triggers are recycled pain, not current danger. The Stoic solution was not to pretend those stories don't exist. It was to slow them down and demand evidence. Is this happening now, or am I remembering? Is this fact or interpretation? Would this meaning hold up if I had to defend it calmly? These questions don't suppress emotion. They starve false emotion of fuel. And here's the part people miss. Refusing unverified meaning does not make you naive. It makes you precise. You're not saying, everything is fine. You're saying, I will not suffer over a conclusion I haven't tested. If something truly is harmful, the evidence will survive inspection. If someone truly intends harm, facts will support it. Stoicism does not ask you to ignore reality. It asks you to wait for it to be clear. This practice also changes how you deal with people. When you stop reacting to assumed motives, conversations soften. You ask instead of accuse. You clarify instead of explode. You give space for misunderstanding to dissolve. And when misunderstanding dissolves, so does most conflict. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this rule. When emotional triggers lose their authority, other people lose the ability to control your inner state through hints, silence, or tone. You no longer jump at shadows. You don't need reassurance for stories you never approved. You stop chasing explanations that were never confirmed. At first, this feels like standing on unstable ground. You're used to reacting quickly, used to certainty, even if it's painful. Letting meaning remain unverified feels uncomfortable. But that discomfort is freedom being built. It's the mind learning to live without constant emotional conclusions. And once this becomes natural, something even more subtle reveals itself. You begin to see how much of your reactivity was never about events, speed, or meaning alone, but about how tightly your sense of self was tied to all of it. When meaning loses its grip, identity starts to loosen. And that opens the door to the next lesson, one most people never even realize exists. Once unverified meaning stops running the show, something unexpected happens. Situations that used to sting start to feel lighter, but not completely harmless yet. There's still a sharp edge sometimes. A comment can still land. A look can still bother you. And if you're honest, you can feel exactly where it hits. Not in the event itself, but in you, in your sense of who you are. That's where the next layer of reactivity hides. Here's the truth most people never hear. You don't react because something happened. You react because something touched your identity. The moment an event feels personal, the nervous system goes on defense. Pride tightens, ego flares. The mind prepares to protect an image. This is where offense is born. The Stoics understood this deeply, and this is why they went further than detaching from outcomes. They detached from identity ownership itself, not in a cold or empty way, but in a precise one. They saw that most suffering comes from confusing what happens with what it says about me. Think about offense. It feels like an attack, but what exactly is being attacked? Not your body, not your safety. It's an idea, an image, a role you're protecting. Smart, respectable, important, competent. When someone questions that image, even indirectly, the mind reacts as if something valuable is under threat. The Stoics asked a dangerous question. What if that image doesn't need defending? Most people live as if their identity is a fragile object they carry everywhere. Every interaction becomes a risk. Praise feels like relief. Criticism feels like danger. Disrespect feels unbearable. Life turns into a constant effort to manage how you're seen. That effort is exhausting, and it keeps reactivity alive. Stoics took a different path. They treated identity as something temporary, flexible, and mostly irrelevant to inner peace. They didn't deny having roles. They denied letting roles rule them. A role could be questioned without threatening their core. An opinion could be challenged without shaking their worth. This is why offense collapses when identity loosens. If there is no rigid me to defend, insults don't find a target. Criticism becomes information, not injury. Disrespect becomes noise, not a verdict. This doesn't mean you accept abuse or stay silent. It means you respond from clarity, not wounded pride. There is a massive difference. Most people think offense proves self-respect. The Stoics knew the opposite was true. The more easily offended you are, the more fragile your sense of self is. When your identity is solid and detached, you don't need to prove it. You don't need to react to protect it. Here's a powerful shift they practiced. Instead of asking, "How does this make me look?" they asked, "Is this under my control?" If the answer was no, it had no authority over their inner state. Someone else's opinion could not injure their character unless they allowed it to. Offense only survives when you believe external judgment defines you. The Stoics trained themselves out of that belief. They located worth internally, in choice, in intention, in conduct, not in reputation, not in approval, not in being understood. This is uncomfortable at first because modern life pushes the opposite message. Your value is measured, rated, compared. Reactivity is rewarded. Quick comebacks, public outrage, emotional displays. All of it reinforces identity attachment. The Stoic path removes you from that game entirely. Another hidden source of offense is over-identification with thoughts and emotions. I am angry. I am disrespected. I am being attacked. The Stoics used different language. They treated emotions as visitors, not residents. Anger could appear without becoming who they were. Criticism could be heard without becoming a personal truth. This separation matters. When you fuse with emotion, reaction feels necessary. When you observe emotion, choice returns. You don't deny what you feel. You simply refuse to turn it into an identity. There's also freedom in realizing this. Many insults fail because they are aimed at a version of you that no longer exists, or never existed at all. People attack their own projections. When your identity is flexible, those projections slide off. Detaching from identity doesn't make you empty. It makes you light. You stop carrying unnecessary weight into every interaction. You stop bracing for judgment. You stop interpreting disagreement as danger. The world becomes less hostile because you are no longer fighting shadows of yourself everywhere. And something else changes quietly. When offense disappears, so does the need to win. You listen better. You speak more clearly. You don't interrupt to defend an image. You don't escalate to protect pride. Your presence becomes grounded, not reactive. This is why Stoics were often described as calm without being passive. They weren't calm because nothing touched them. They were calm because nothing owned them. Identity was no longer a trigger point. The real power here is subtle. When people realize they can't offend you, they lose leverage. Provocation stops working. Manipulation weakens. You're no longer pulled into emotional games you didn't choose to play. This doesn't make you superior, it makes you free. And yet, even with identity loosened, even with meaning inspected, even with delay trained, there is one final trap that keeps people reactive longer than they should be. It's not about what happens. It's not about who you think you are. It's about how you judge yourself after a reaction occurs. That judgment quietly rebuilds the very cycle you're trying to escape. And that's what comes next. Even after identity loosens, even after offense stops landing the way it used to, something strange can still pull you back into old patterns. It happens quietly, usually after the moment has passed. You reacted, maybe less than before, maybe only internally, but you noticed it. And then another voice appeared, a harsh one. You should be better than this. After all this work, you still reacted? That voice feels responsible, even noble. In reality, it's one of the most destructive habits the Stoics work to dismantle. Most people don't just react once. They react And then they react to the fact that they reacted. And that second reaction is often worse than the first.
Here's the mistake that keeps people stuck. They confuse a natural response with a moral failure. The Stoics never did.
They understood something that modern self-help often ignores. The body and mind have reflexes. Fast ones, old ones. Some are trained by biology, some by experience. An initial emotional spike is not a choice, it's a signal. What matters is what you do after the signal appears. Most people collapse these two things into one. Emotion appears, and instantly the mind says, "I failed." That judgment brings shame. Shame tightens the system. Tight systems react faster next time. So the next trigger hits harder, and the loop continues. The Stoics cut the loop at its root. They made a clear distinction between what arises automatically and what you agree with deliberately. A flash of anger was not a sin. A surge of fear was not a flaw. These were natural movements, like a knee-jerk when the doctor taps it. The moral line was crossed only if the mind consented to the emotion and acted from it without examination. This distinction changes everything. When you believe that feeling a reaction means you've failed, you train yourself to fear your own inner life. You start bracing against emotions instead of understanding them. That resistance creates tension, and tension breeds more reactivity. The Stoics saw this clearly. They refused to add punishment to inevitability. They treated the first reaction as information, not a verdict. Anger says, "Something feels threatened." Fear says, "Something feels uncertain." Shame says, "Something feels exposed." These signals may be inaccurate, exaggerated, or outdated, but they are signals, not crimes. The moment you label them as failure, you stop learning from them. This is why Stoics emphasize gentleness with the self without softness toward behavior. You could acknowledge a reaction without indulging it. You could notice emotion without turning it into action. And you could do all of that without attacking your character. Here's the hidden cost of self-judgment. It turns improvement into punishment. Instead of thinking, "I noticed that faster than before," you think, "I shouldn't feel this way anymore." That thought erases progress and replaces it with frustration. Frustration drains motivation. Eventually, people give up and say, "This is just how I am." Stoics never spoke to themselves that way. They expected reactions. They trained for them. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders to himself not because he was weak, but because he was human. He did not assume mastery meant perfection. He assumed mastery meant correction without cruelty. There's also a practical reason shame fuels reactivity. When you judge yourself harshly, you create an inner threat. The nervous system doesn't care whether danger comes from outside or inside. Threat is threat, so the body stays on edge. On edge, bodies react quickly. Calm reflection becomes harder. You end up fighting yourself instead of guiding yourself. The Stoic approach removes that inner enemy. When a reaction appears, the response is simple and neutral. There it is. No drama, no identity attached, no moral collapse. Just observation. That observation alone creates space. Space weakens momentum. Momentum is what turns feeling into action. They also understood timing. You don't analyze yourself in the heat of emotion. You wait until the system cools. Then you review calmly, not to shame, but to adjust. What impression did I accept too quickly? What meaning slipped past inspection? This is not self-attack, it's self-training. Another powerful Stoic insight is this: shame looks like responsibility, but it's actually avoidance. When you shame yourself, you focus on how bad you feel instead of what you can do better next time. It feels active, but it's passive. True responsibility is quiet and forward-looking. The moment you stop punishing yourself for reactions, reactions lose one of their strongest reinforcements. You're no longer afraid of feeling. You're no longer rushing to prove you're better. You allow the moment to pass, and in allowing it, it passes faster. This also builds resilience. When you know that a reaction won't lead to self-condemnation, you're more willing to face challenging situations. You don't avoid triggers out of fear of failure. You engage, knowing that even if something arises, it's not the end of the story. Over time, reactions weaken naturally, not because you crushed them, but because you stopped feeding them with meaning, identity, urgency, and shame. Each layer you removed reduced their strength. And here's the final relief most people don't expect. When you stop judging yourself for reacting, you stop judging others as harshly too. You recognize reflex in them. You see humanity instead of intention. This softens your world without making you weak. By now, reactivity has lost most of its fuel. Labels have been corrected, delay has been trained, meaning has been inspected, identity has loosened. Shame no longer compounds the problem. And yet, one belief can still quietly restore the whole system if it goes unchallenged. The belief that life owes you comfort, that things should go smoothly, that disturbance is abnormal. That belief creates fragility where strength should be. And it's the final rule the Stoics dismantled to become truly unshakable. That last belief is the quietest one of all, and also the most dangerous. Because even after you learn to pause, to inspect meaning, to loosen identity, and to stop punishing yourself for natural reactions, reactivity can still return if this one idea stays untouched. It hides behind reasonable thoughts. It sounds harmless. But it shapes how every disturbance feels the moment it arrives. The idea is simple, that life should feel comfortable. Not perfect, not painless, just emotionally smooth, predictable, manageable. And when life breaks that expectation, even slightly, the body reacts as if something has gone wrong. The Stoics saw this clearly, and they rejected it completely. Here's the hard truth. When you believe comfort is normal, discomfort feels like an injustice. When you expect ease, resistance feels personal. When you assume peace is the default, disruption feels unbearable. Reactivity feeds on that gap between expectation and reality. Most modern stress comes from that gap. You're not just dealing with traffic. You're dealing with the belief that traffic shouldn't exist. You're not just hearing criticism. You're reacting to the belief that things should go smoothly if you're doing your best. You're not just tired. You're angry that life didn't cooperate today. The Stoics trained themselves out of this expectation early, not because they were pessimistic, but because they were realistic. They understood that life is movement, friction, interruption, delay, and resistance. To expect otherwise is to set yourself up for constant emotional conflict. This is why entitlement to comfort creates fragility. When the mind expects smoothness, it becomes sensitive to bumps. Minor disturbances feel large, small inconveniences feel heavy. Ordinary human behavior feels offensive. The nervous system stays tight, always surprised by reality. Stoics removed the surprise. They practiced something radical for its time and still radical today. They expected difficulty, not in a dramatic way, not with dread, just with acceptance. This may be challenging. This may be inconvenient. This may not go my way. When difficulty arrived, it didn't feel like a violation. It felt like confirmation. And when confirmation happens, reactivity has nothing to attach to. This doesn't mean they walked around miserable or tense. It means they stopped demanding emotional comfort from the world. They stopped negotiating with reality. And that alone gave them strength without bitterness. There's a big difference between resilience and hardness. Hardness comes from closing off. Resilience comes from widening tolerance. When you widen tolerance, less feels threatening. When less feels threatening, fewer reactions fire. Modern culture quietly trains the opposite. Comfort is advertised as a right. Ease is sold as a goal. Any discomfort is framed as something to eliminate immediately. This trains the nervous system to expect constant regulation from the outside. When regulation fails, frustration explodes. The Stoics trained internal regulation by removing the expectation altogether. They reminded themselves daily that plans break, people disappoint, bodies ache, and emotions fluctuate. None of this was seen as unfair. It was seen as part of being alive. When you stop arguing with that fact, energy returns. Here's where things shift deeply. When you no longer believe life owes you comfort, discomfort loses its power to offend you. It becomes information instead of insult. You don't like it, but you don't fight it emotionally, and what you don't fight passes faster. This also changes how you relate to stress. Stress often comes from trying to preserve comfort at all costs. You rush, you snap, you tense, you react. Not because the situation is extreme, but because your system is trying to restore ease as quickly as possible. When ease is no longer a requirement, urgency dissolves. Another hidden effect of comfort entitlement is emotional bargaining. If I do everything right, I shouldn't feel this way. The Stoics never made that deal. They knew effort does not guarantee ease. Wisdom does not cancel difficulty. Virtue does not remove friction. It only improves how you meet it. Once that belief is gone, disappointment weakens. You stop feeling betrayed by reality. You stop interpreting discomfort as a sign you're failing. You stop taking normal human strain as proof something is wrong with you or the world. This is where resilience becomes quiet and steady. You don't need pep talks. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't need everything to feel good to function well. You can act effectively even when things feel rough. And notice what doesn't happen. You don't become cold. You don't stop caring. You don't harden. You simply stop demanding that life protect you from emotional waves. You learn to ride them instead. The Stoics practice this through voluntary discomfort, small acts, skipping comfort on purpose, sitting with inconvenience, not as punishment, but as training. Each time they chose not to escape mild discomfort, they proved to themselves that they could endure it without breaking. That proof rewired their relationship with difficulty. When real challenges came, their system didn't panic. It recognized the terrain. This is the final removal of reactivity's foundation. When you no longer expect comfort, triggers lose context. They still happen, but they no longer signal danger or injustice. They become moments to respond, not threats to survive. Put all of this together, and something powerful emerges. You stop managing emotions. You stop chasing calm. You stop fighting yourself. You stop arguing with reality. Reactivity doesn't disappear because you crushed it. It disappears because it no longer has a reason to exist. That's what the Stoics were aiming for all along. Not numbness, not control. Freedom. Freedom from being pulled by every impression. Freedom from stories you didn't verify. freedom from defending an identity that doesn't need protection, freedom from shaming yourself for being human, freedom from expecting life to be easy. When that freedom settles in, you don't need to try to be unreactive. You just are. If you're still reactive, now you know why. It was never about weak willpower or strong emotions. It was about the rules you were never taught. You learned that reactions begin with labels, not events. That power lives in delay, not forced calm. That meaning must be proven before it's believed. That identity doesn't need defending. That reacting isn't failure. And comfort was never guaranteed. When those illusions fall away, reactivity has nothing left to stand on. If something in this changed how you see your own reactions, write, "I choose clarity" in the comments. I read them, and it tells me who's actually doing the work. And if you want more lessons like this, simple, deep, and practical, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Strength begins in the mind, and now you're training it.